Welcome back to the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Wednesday, November 6th, and a lot of stuff has changed since the last time we talked, guys. A lot of stuff that maybe we were anticipating would change. Some of it maybe not, but look, it's a completely new day for the Saints franchise. We are recording this on Wednesday morning. Shortly after we record this, we'll go out to witness our first practice with Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach and a notable player no longer there on the roster. So we'll dig into all of that today. Guys, we have to start with the big news over the weekend. The Saints lost their seventh straight game. They lost to the Carolina Panthers, who were 1-7, one of the worst teams in the NFL. The Saints can now stake their own claim as one of the worst teams in the NFL. And after that game, I think a lot of us were anticipating what would end up happening. Dennis Allen notified by the team on Monday morning that he was no longer the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Team let him go. We got statements from Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson. We got a statement from Dennis Allen. And not long after he was let go, the Saints named Darren Rizzi as the interim head coach. So, guys, let's just start this. Let's start with this right before we kind of dig into this whole thing. And I'll start with you, Rod. Why was Dennis Allen let go after, 43 games as the Saints head coach?
Going into Sunday's game, I wrote the column Saturday that I thought that, if you lose this one, I just thought that was like the deal breaker because this team was so bad. Probably a little surprised that they went ahead and did it immediately, but I did think that it was just time to move in a different direction because they had clearly lost the team, and it wasn't just what they did in the game Sunday. I mean, they found a way to lose, which is what they've been doing, but then you just saw these social media posts from a few players. Like, it just seemed like things that just spiraled out of control, and I think when it gets to that point, I think you just have to do something different.
Yeah, and Duncan, I want to go to you for this one because, look, we're going to get into some of the factors that led to the Saints' record to this point. But just from a historical perspective, we haven't seen the Saints make moves in season a whole lot, and there were a lot of reasons they were 2-7 this year. But this had to get to a breaking point for this organization that is so unwilling to make these types of moves to go ahead and decide to make this move.
Yeah, if you really think about it, Luke, if you take the organization as a whole, even going over to the Pelican side, they just don't do this. Historically, they haven't made midseason changes. Mickey Loomis doesn't believe in that. He doesn't think it helps matters. He's very loyal. The whole organization from the top down has been loyal. This is the first, as we said last week, the first head coaching change they've made midseason since 1980. And I know this is a totally different management group and ownership group, but in general, they don't believe in that. But as Rod said, these were unprecedented circumstances with the way things had spiraled. The team was getting worse. Arguably was worse. You can't lose to the Carolina Panthers, a team you beat in the opener by 30, 40 points, and then you lose to them. I think that dictates that you have to make a drastic change. And I think more than anything, the team was not responding anymore to Dennis Allen. They weren't quitting on him. I don't think that was the case, but it almost felt like they were going through the motions, kind of punching the clock. And at that point, I think what he was doing was not working. And so, look, this was probably a decision they didn't want to make, but they had to make. And I think it came from the very top, from Gail Benson herself, maybe even overruling Mickey Loomis to make this decision, because Mickey Loomis hired Dennis Allen, was very close to him, very loyal to him, wanted to see him succeed, and gave him really, I think, frankly, every opportunity to succeed. Now, I know they had some adversity, but the product was not good, and I'm not sure it's going to get a whole lot better, but at least this way you get a fresh start on the hiring cycle and maybe get a little boost in the season going forward.
Yeah, and we'll get into the whole decision and where it was made, where we believe it was made. But, Matt, I just kind of want to get your take. And look, we're in the locker room 3 days a week, 4 days a week if you count game day. Did you get a sense just from talking to the team that maybe the message, the belief in the head coach was kind of wavering a little bit?
Yeah, I did, and I think it was evident with what Rod said after the game. So many Dennis Allen's players went on social media to kind of clown where the team was at, and I just don't think you would have seen that if they had still confidence and faith in him that they could turn it around. Alvin Kamara kept making subtle hints or not so subtle hints. Even after the Denver game, reporter asked him if the team still believed in Dennis Allen, and he just completely gave a very subdued answer, didn't really answer the question. So I think there were some guys in particular. You saw Carl Granderson's post after Dennis Allen was fired with a smiley emoji and a good things caption. I think he had just lost portions of the locker room, and I thought, I don't know if you guys saw, I'm sure you did see it, but James Hurst's comments on WDSU saying how last year when Dennis Allen didn't have the players back after the Atlanta game, the season finale, that went a long way in kind of poisoning the well. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and that was really interesting too, because Hurst did say that what they did, they realized was the wrong thing to do.
Right.
Yeah, they freelanced and they did their own thing, and they scored a touchdown out of victory formation. I think generally, widely, that was viewed as kind of a BS move. I think they all understood that. They knew that they were probably in the wrong for doing that. But there is something to be said there when the coach, understandably, if he's upset about it, says, look, that wasn't my call. But when you're talking about a relationship between a coach and a team, for the coach to not have the team's back in that instance, even when they were admittedly in their own words wrong, right. I think that has ramifications on the locker room itself.
And I would say this, we had gotten word that if he lost that game, that he would be in serious trouble. I think word had trickled out from the organization that this was kind of a make or break game for Dennis Allen. I would not be surprised, knowing how small a town New Orleans is, knowing how small an organization that is, that word had gotten to the players too. And that's why the reaction we saw, because it was, like Matt said, that was out of character. We hadn't seen that all year. And it felt like the dam broke on that. And I wouldn't be surprised if word had reached at least some of the players, and then once it does, it's difficult to come back from that.
I think one of the things for Dennis was that, I just can't think about accountability. And going back even to that Falcons game, I think about his whole career. I don't ever remember seeing him on the sideline, just kind of chewing somebody out a little bit. I just never saw it. And so I don't think players were afraid to mess up. Nothing's going to happen. You just kind of get to do what you want to do. And I think in the end, I think that ended up being part of his downfall.
So Dennis Allen finishes 18-25 in 2+ seasons as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that Saints Insider is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are actually made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to Bank Anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net, member FDIC, equal housing lender. We're going to talk a lot more about Dennis Allen. We're going to talk about Darren Rizzi, the interim head coach, and we're going to talk about Marshon Lattimore, who is now playing for
The Washington Commanders.
The Washington Commanders, that's right. But before we do all that, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly.
Nice bike.
Thanks. Can I get it back before Saturday?
That might be tough.
Whoa. Is it just you?
For now, let's take a look.
Can you reach that? How about?
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
All right, welcome back. So Guys, we Matt, you and I were actually in the air when this was going down on Monday morning, flying back from Charlotte. Jeff and Rod, you were here, but shortly after the news broke, the Saints issued a statement from owner Gail Benson and general manager Mickey Loomis, a joint statement saying Dennis Allen was no longer going to be the head coach, Darren Rizzi was going to be the interim. And I want to start here because we're talking about how this decision was made, why it was made, etc. And I think immediately, as soon as these statements were released, I think it gave us a little bit of a sense of where that went. And I want to read Mickey Loomis' statement on this. It says, after Dennis was fired, he said, DA is an excellent football coach. This season we've had an avalanche of injuries. It took the toll. DA never offered excuses. He fought each day for this organization and this team, and that is what makes today disappointing. Dennis has been an integral part of this organization's success for the better part of 20 years. He will be missed. So, I think all of us would probably be in agreement where we think Dennis Allen is a good football coach. And I don't think anybody has a problem with his character as a man. We all have pleasant dealings with him. Found him to be a good guy who has had a lot of success here as a football coach. But I don't know. Mickey's statement seemed kind of strange from the get-go, where the whole reason for firing him was circumstances outside of his control, and kind of seemed just kind of resistant to the idea. So I kind of want to start this conversation about how this came to be with that, and what y'all's kind of initial reaction was to Mickey's statement. And whoever wants to take it first, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to focus on what he also said on the radio last night on WWL. I won't address his not so subtle comments about Jeff's column in a second, but he said that there was stress and pressure on the organization which caused them to make a move. And I think that was a lot of outside factors, that this fan base was absolutely fed up with Dennis Allen, that they really risked kind of poisoning the well if things had kind of continued on this track. And so I think ownership, the business side of the building, like that had a lot to do with why they made this move now. You know, the results ultimately got Dennis Allen fired, but why did they break with tradition, and why did they have their first in-season coach firing since 1980? That was the stress and the pressure.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. Like, I think Mickey probably understood they were going to have to make a change with Dennis Allen, but I think he preferred to have done it after the year, and I think that's where he got overruled. I mean, I was out there early on Monday, and the only people there early in the building were Dennis Lauscha and Gail Benson. So they were there early. I think this decision was been in the works. I think they knew this probably could, if he didn't beat Carolina, that they were probably going to have to make this move. And you have to get, your ducks in a row. There's a lot of things you have to do when you make a coaching change. You have to restructure the coaching staff. Obviously, there's media you have to deal with. You have to inform people in the building. There's a lot of moving parts that had to be addressed. But I do think Mickey Loomis, if you think about it, I mean, the only head coaches he's hired in his role are Sean Payton and Dennis Allen. So he obviously wants Dennis Allen to work. I mean, for selfish ego reasons, this is part of his legacy, this hire. And he wanted it to work out, and he basically handpicked Dennis Allen. I mean, I know they went through the interview process, but he was the front runner all along, if you remember when they hired Dennis Allen. So this tarnishes his legacy to some degree. So I think obviously he wanted to give him a long runway. And I think that's one of the reasons why he allowed him to change out his offensive coaching staff this past offseason, change the defensive coaching staff, bring in Derek Carr. As the general manager, he gave him a lot of opportunities to be successful. And I think that's where a lot of fans have become frustrated with Mickey Loomis, is he keeps bringing up things about comparisons to Sean Payton. Well, Sean Payton had won a Super Bowl. He had skins on the wall. He'd been to an NFC Championship game. Dennis Allen doesn't have any of that. I mean, he has no credentials to compare. All they've seen is losing, and he was even losing with the Raiders. So I just think he's been a little tone deaf in all this. And I think for the first time since I've covered the team, it felt like there was a little bit of a break from the collaborative decision making in the building, and I think that's pretty significant.
Yeah, I think you go back to that press conference in January that we always reference, and I mean, it was clear then that Mickey wanted Dennis to work. I mean, he kind of doubled down. He pulled out the card and, compared him to all these people. And I think he just really wanted to work. And so then we saw the injuries, and he kind of wanted to use that as an excuse. But, I don't know if it was his decision at the end. I assume somebody else made the ultimate decision. But I've been here 11 years, and I think the only people that they've ever changed was this coach, and they fired Dale Demps in the middle of a season. And they fired Dale right when it was the night after AD walked out of the arena. It was all over TNT that night that AD left the arena to go. It was All-Star weekend. He left early during the game. They showed him walking down the hallway, and it was kind of embarrassing for the organization. I think some of this stuff Sunday was probably a little embarrassing for the organization, seeing the Twitter rants and all that too, on top of the losing streak. So I just think it was just a culmination of all that, and it was just too much for this team. This front office doesn't want to be embarrassed, and they were kind of embarrassed Sunday, I feel like.
Yeah. I just some of the stuff, and I think Mickey's a good GM, but his kind of tenacity on holding on to this thing about Dennis Allen and kind of consistently making excuses, valid excuses though they may be. The injury situation's been terrible this year. They've had some bad bounces and stuff, but man, I mean, 2-7 is 2-7. And they've had winnable games within that 7-game losing streak. They've lost them, or they haven't made the plays to go win the games. And I think there's a lot in that falls on the head coach.
Do you think they fire him if they're 2-7, you lose 7 in a row, and they lost to the Ravens Sunday? Would that have been enough? Or it's because of who it was too?
Well, I think the Panthers thing played a big part.
Here's the other thing I would say to Luke's point. I think he gets a mulligan on a 7-game losing streak, even with Carolina, if they make the playoffs in one of his first 2 years, maybe. But the fact is, they haven't. This was kind of an all or, he had to be all in this year. I mean, he had to win because this is not just a 1-year decision; it's a 3-year decision,
right.
And he had not got it done the first 2 years. And I know that they've had injuries, no doubt. I mean, the significant ones to significant players, but some of that also happens when a team is losing. Some of that stuff starts to happen. It's not unusual.
And
so
Marshon Lattimore is probably going to suit up for the Commanders this weekend.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So how much of that is on DA?
And you got Derek Carr back Sunday, so that that was supposed to be like the piece that they should win with Carr, and they still won.
Yeah, they're going up against the worst defense in the NFL, bar none. There's no getting around that. They're bottom 5 in every category, and they have multiple opportunities to put the game away in the fourth quarter, and they can't do it. And I just think that I think there's that. There's a lot of the anecdotal stuff, the parking lot thing, which Mickey obviously disagreed with. But I'm going to be on Jeff's side on that. Mm-hmm. I don't care about construction over there. I've covered the team for 7 years. It's been worse this year than it ever has, and it's not related to the construction stuff. We walk through that player locker or that player parking lot every day on our way to practice. There's dozens of empty spots in there. That was a discipline issue. And if it wasn't a discipline issue, then why are there notices in players' lockers saying you need to stop parking in there?
Yeah, and I think those kind of things, those excuses, don't help Mickey Loomis with the fan base.
Not at all.
Oh, I mean, it's embarrassing. That's what it is. I mean, your first question, you're asked about why you fired your head coach. You take issue more with a column. I get it. I mean, he has every right to be mad about that column or whatever, but it's that's literally your first answer. And he didn't talk to the media, which
that's what I was about to.
We can debate that, but you've got to have some accountability for why you guys are in this mess, and giving excuses over injuries and saying that you are you allow the 8th least amount of penalties.
Don't want to look up the penalties from the first 2 years, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, and I mentioned this in the column, was players themselves, the first thing out of their mouths about what's wrong was attention to detail.
Right.
That is basically the parking lot analogy was addressing discipline, attention to detail, accountability. Those issues are broad issues, but I think it's a big part of why they're at where they're at.
And if they aren't undisciplined, then why did Mickey Loomis, after last season, go in front of the whole team and told them to be more committed?
Right. It's the same issue they had a year ago about culture, and I think they tried to address it, but I think they kind of half addressed it. It felt like it wasn't a full blown. They're in such a desperate state they couldn't blow it up.
Right.
They couldn't afford to. They had to try and kind of halfway go in, and it just hasn't worked. And it looked like it had worked, but I think we all talked about it. All of our predictions in preseason, everyone in a different form or fashion said this thing was kind of fragile. It was precarious. So it wasn't built to withstand adversity. And once this adversity happened, we just saw it all kind of, the house of cards come crumbling down.
Yeah, because I do think those first 2 weeks, people were excited, people were bought in. And then also, DA did make some changes in the offseason trying to appeal more to guys, trying to lighten up the atmosphere and the mood. And I do think that resonated with players, but do they care about that when, you've lost 7 in a row? No.
Right. All right. So Dennis Allen's out, whether they want it or not. Darren Rizzi is in. Look, Darren's been here for, I think this is his 6th season in New Orleans now. Yeah. He's been the special teams coordinator throughout all of it. Obviously, anybody who follows the NFL closely knows those Rick Goslin end of year special teams rankings. Saints are always top 4, top 5 in those. I think they were number 1 in the NFL last year in those rankings. He's a very good coach. But this is going to be a first-time opportunity for him at the NFL level. He's only coached special teams in the NFL. He's coached 2 small colleges as the head coach, Rhode Island and New Haven. So big opportunity for him. Guys, you've all been around him for a while. Matt a little less than us, but you talked to him plenty. What are the Saints getting in Darren Rizzi, and how will he maybe try to change this thing and turn the direction of this thing around?
I think the first thing is just the energy that he brings. I mean, special teams coaches are kind of wired like that in a way, typically, and I think the energy will be good for this team, especially with what they're going through. I mean, is that enough to win games? I don't know, but I think the players will play for him. I think his pregame speeches are probably going to make them kind of want to run through a wall for him. So, at this point in the season, that's what you need. So, you got to start somewhere. And for him, obviously, it's an audition because he does want to be the head coach. He applied for the Dolphins job in
2019.
The interview
would have been
here
for
as well.
2019. Yeah.
Then he applied for the job here. So, I mean, we know he wants to be a head coach. And just our time's been around him. I mean, he seems like a guy that's he connects well with all the players. And I think all those things are pluses that are going to, work in his favor.
Yeah, inspiring, I think, would kind of be the word I would use. I thought it was notable a few weeks ago when we were asking Juwan Johnson about whether there needed to be a collective message to improve the locker room or for players to buy in. He actually pointed to a message from Darren Rizzi, not Dennis Allen, about this 1 of 11 mantra. If one guy does their job, then all 11 do it. I do think his message can resonate with this locker room.
Yeah, I think the enthusiasm is going to be needed. I mean, DA's personality was kind of matter-of-fact, business-like. That's just how he was, kind of, understated in a way. And I think Rizzi's, one of the reasons why I think he's a perfect selection is his enthusiasm, the energy that Rod mentioned. And I think the other thing that's important, Luke, your point about Rick Goslin's rankings, I mean, that's the one pretty consistent facet of this team that's been good ever since he's been here. And it's, there is attention to detail with the special teams. We've seen it occur time and again with either block kicks or returns.
Fake punt last week.
Yes, big-time stuff. The accountability you heard players say. I thought it was interesting what Tyrann Mathieu said at the press conference the other day where he said, look, I think some guys need to be called out from time to time. I think it's important. I don't know if that's a veiled reference to Dennis Allen not doing it, but it sounded like he was saying that Darren Rizzi does that. He comes from the Parcells School, which we know That was a Peyton. He was a mentor to Peyton. He was a mentor to Darren Rizzi. I think that accountability is a big factor right now that the players are kind of craving. They want that. And so I think in a lot of ways he's going to bring a lot of good qualities to this team, and I think there's going to be a bump from it.
I think it's good that you kind of look back at some of the decisions he's made over the years, and it may not have been his ultimate decision, but he played a big role in them. But like the decision to let Will Lutz go, like that was a bold move, and they were willing to do it, and he stuck with his guns, and they did it. And I just think that says a lot about who he is as a coach as well, that he wasn't afraid to make that kind of move that was going to probably be questioned by a lot of people, but he did it anyway.
So a couple things I want to bring up too. First thing, Albert Breer reported this morning. We'll see it later on today. One of the first orders of business for Darren Rizzi is getting rid of this kind of COVID era locker room, and he's going to for those who don't know, during COVID, traditionally locker rooms were set up to where the quarterbacks sat with the quarterbacks, running backs sat with the running backs, et cetera, and they were all had their own areas of the locker room. And during COVID, to prevent somebody getting COVID and then transmitting it to an entire running back room and knocking that entire room out for a game, they started kind of separating the position groups and having lockers put at random. Rizzi is going back to how it was before COVID and trying to get maybe a little bit more unity in that locker room, which I think it's a small but notable first change. And then he also said on his coach's show on Monday night that he disagreed with like Dennis Allen's call on fourth and one.
Yeah.
They were in negative territory, but it was near midfield. Had a chance to put the game away. They just had a 1st and 29, and they got 28 yards back. So going up against the worst defense in the NFL, a close game, put the game away, he would have gone for it in that situation. And I think that's maybe something we're going to see a little bit more of. I don't think Dennis. Yeah, I think he got a little bit of maybe an unearned rap as a conservative coach because of who he is as a defensive-minded head coach. A lot of times those coaches are more conservative. We have seen him go for it on fourth downs. We've seen him go for long field goals. But I think when it comes down to like crunch time, like it was, he kind of reverts back to that conservative mindset and trusting the defense. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of a foot on the gas approach from Darren Rizzi because I mean at this point, why not?
No, I was going to bring that up, so I'm glad you brought it up. I think that's going to be a big change, is the way he manages a game. I asked him a few weeks ago. I know, look, it was a bad play, maybe cost them the game against the Falcons when Rashid Shaheed muffed the punt. But I asked him about, do you want your return man, especially a game breaker like Shaheed, to always have that mindset of being aggressive? And he said yes. That's the way he coaches. And you can tell those units are very aggressive. And I think you instill that confidence in players. And sometimes you're going to have a mistake, and it's going to be bad. But I think overall, you win more often than you lose with that mindset. And that 4th and 1 was a prime example. The Saints had momentum because they gotten to the 1 yard short from a difficult situation. Your game instincts should say, we've got momentum, let's go. We got Taysom Hill here, short yardage. Worst defense in the league. Let's go. Let's not try to hang on here with the lead. Let's put this team away.
Saints ran for 200 yards in that game.
Exactly. And I think that's where Dennis Allen, his game management, he tended to regress to the defensive coordinator. Let's just hang on. It'll be different, I think, with Rizzi.
Yeah. And last point that I want to make about Darren Rizzi, and this is something that is true of special teams coaches, is he has worked with about 95% of this roster personally.
Yep.
There's no I'm working with the offensive guys, I'm working with the defensive guys. He has a personal relationship with just about the entire roster. And as Tyrann Mathieu said on Monday, even the guys who don't play special teams, Mathieu hasn't played a special team snap since 2018. He's got a relationship with those guys. So I think if you're looking for somebody who's going to guide the ship for these last 8 games, I think he was the obvious choice. I think a lot of people have said he was the obvious choice. Rod Walker got a story ready on Sunday night after the game saying Darren Rizzi is going to be the interim head coach, anticipating a move with Dennis Allen. So I think he's clearly the guy. We'll see what he's got in these last 8 games. I think it'll be interesting to see where the Saints go from here after the season. whether they want to kind of continue with this continuity thing or go a completely new direction, but that's a topic for another day. Look, we are going to get into the other big news of the week. Marshon Lattimore yesterday was traded. Before we do that, we are going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. All right, welcome back. Guys, I think if we go into the history of our group chat, we were all chatting Monday night during the Chiefs and Buccaneers game, and I think we'd all considered a strong possibility that Marshon Lattimore was not going to be part of this team after Tuesday's trade deadline. And sure enough, Tuesday comes, and Marshon Lattimore is getting interest from several teams around the league, and the Saints end up pulling the trigger on a deal with the Washington Commanders. Oh, yeah, we're going to be hammering this bell here. Yeah. I hope you all don't have, like, some phobia of bells. Okay. For context, Matt used to cover the Commanders, so it's just this is kind of hilarious that this just kind of keeps working out where the Saints keep making deals with them and allowing us to ring this bell. Anyways, okay, so the conditions of the trade, Marshon Lattimore and the Saints' 2025 fifth-rounder go to the Washington Commanders. In return, the Saints get Washington's third and fourth in next year's draft, as well as the Saints' original sixth-round pick, which they had sent to Washington for John Ridgeway. Throwback to another Bell moment from earlier this season. So, guys, we'll get into the compensation in a second, but let's talk about Lattimore. Four-time Pro Bowler, 2017 Defensive Rookie of the Year, was a cornerstone piece of one of the greatest runs his franchise has ever had, 17-20. I think they led the NFL in wins during that stretch. Very good player, a guy that consistently locked up the opposing team's number one wideout, changed the way the Saints were able to play defense under Dennis Allen. Very popular player, a lot of Lattimore jerseys in the crowd all the time. But when you start looking at the last couple of years, the reality is he's played 24 games since the start of the 2022 season. And in the games he's been in there, he hasn't necessarily been the same player that he was at the beginning of his career. So when you guys are kind of looking at Lattimore, the fact that the Saints decided to move on from him, what was kind of your initial take on it, Rod? You've covered him his whole career, and like, how do you think this sets the Saints up in the future here?
I understood the trade. I mean, I think at this point he wasn't really playing a lot. Like you gave the numbers on that. I still think he's a really good player. I think toward the end he may have checked out a little bit on Dennis Allen, which, and I don't know that. I just kind of feel like
it's definitely the vibe.
Yeah, that was just kind of the vibe I got. But I think he didn't play Sunday, and his hamstring probably healed overnight, I think, when they fired DA. But I think he's a really good player. I think he's the best cornerback this team's ever had. He will be missed, I feel like. I think a lot of guys in the locker room, he wasn't the kind of leader that he didn't talk a whole lot. I don't know, have we talked to him at all this
training
season?
camp?
I think I've talked to him twice in the year plus that I've been here.
So he's not a big talker, rah-rah guy, but I think guys really looked up to him and respected him because he was so good. Because he is so good. And I think for Washington, I think he's a piece that's going to really help them do some good things.
For sure.
Yeah, it made sense to move on. Personally, we can talk about the compensation in a second, but I was really surprised at the return. That was a really good value for him. But it just had kind of run its course, and there was a question of, all right, they fired Dennis Allen. Can you get this guy to buy back in? But he was really their only appealing trade asset. Mm-hmm. He was the only player that was going to fetch any sort of return, notable return. And so if you're the Saints, you're 2-7, you aren't going to rebuild. This move just made a lot of sense in that even if they don't do a full teardown, it still gives the next coach a lot of options, and it can help maybe accelerate and get you back to a better place.
Let's talk about this for a second, right? Let's say the Saints hit all the right buttons the next 2 off seasons, and they have this dramatic, fast rebuild. Like you're talking about 2 seasons, which is highly unlikely for them to just like get right back in the mix, being a competitive team. Lattimore would be 30 years old. He'd be coming up to the end of his contract. You're still going to have to eat the cap number regardless. And at that point, he's either a player you're hanging on to who's in his 30s, who we've seen them do plenty of that, or he's going somewhere else by the time that you're good again. Mm-hmm. So, like, yeah, it sucks to lose a guy who's really popular, who's been a very good player here, who's definitely not going to help this team get out of their tailspin, right, if that's what you want to see. But in terms of just like getting this franchise back on track, like he's not part of the immediate future plans.
Well, they were arguably done with him going back to December when they redid his contract. Kind of signaled to everyone around the league that he was available for a trade. They had to have a conversation with them to basically say, do you want to be here or not for another season? They kind of hashed it out for the next few months, but at the middle of the season, it made sense to move him.
Yeah, I think he needed a fresh start. I mean, I think they shopped him in the offseason. They didn't like the offers they were getting. I think they
probably weren't getting a 3rd and a 4th
right.
offer.
And I think Washington was smart. I mean, Washington sees, hey, we've got this dynamic young quarterback. Things are different now. They're smart. They're going all in. That's a smart move for Washington. I think it's a great move by the organization. Mickey Loomis probably didn't expect that type of return. I think it's a really good move. But I want to say something about, Lattimore. If he was checked out, which I think he was, that says something to me about him. I mean, Norm and I were talking about this before we came on air. You've got teammates that are out there fighting. You're all 2-6. You're trying to fight. You've got to be a teammate, man. You've got to be there with your guys. You can't just not play. That doesn't work. He's done that now, I think, 2 years in a row. I've seen people defend him. Yes, that's not right. Not only that, you're getting paid a lot of money to play. So for those 2 reasons, I think they needed to move on from him before this because it was not a good situation. If I'm coaching the defensive backs, if I'm coaching the defense, or I'm coaching this team like Dennis Allen, I don't want that influence with my younger defensive backs on this team. I don't want that from the best, most talented player on the team. That's why I think they needed to have moved on from him. And I also think the factor we haven't talked about as well was they've got some decisions to make on other corners, right, financially. So I'm sure his salary factored into that, the long-term future, like you mentioned, with the team.
Right. They are going to have to eat a massive dead cap hit for him next year. $31.6 million, I think, is the number. Mm-hmm. But that was going to be his cap charge regardless. It was either going to be that or they were going to restructure his 25 number, cut that down a little bit, and have a massive dead cap hit later on. So one way or another, they had to eat kind of a big poison pill on that. But like to your point, I mean, we were walking out for practice last week, 2-6, 6-game losing streak, and Marshon was getting in his car and going somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, which like, I mean, for all I know, the guy was just going to get lunch in between his rehab sessions. But like, that's to me, like the optics of that are pretty bad.
Well, I'm sure he's not the only player on the team that wasn't a huge fan of Dennis Allen. But those other guys are out there fighting. They're playing. They're out there doing what they can to try and get them out of the hole. To me, that's it's unforgivable to just kind of quit on your team. And he's done that. I mean, there was that same issue a year ago with his injury. So to me, that's why I wrote in January they needed to move on from Marshon Lattimore. He's a tremendously talented player. He's the best defensive back, bar none, in the history of the franchise. I mean, there's no question. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler, defensive rookie of the year. Your point about him basically changing the way they play defense, he was part of the best defenses this organization's ever had, in addition to the Dome Patrol. So he deserves a place in the Saints Hall of Fame. But, man, there's a way to handle your business. And I didn't like the way he handled it at the end.
I don't know if you go back to not this past offseason, but the one before that, players, the DA, everybody like raved about how hard he was working because he kept talking about how he wanted to get back to that elite level, and they talked about how he was in the training room doing this extra stuff. And I don't know, but something happened between then and now, and he just never really got back to who he was. I mean, he still was a good player. Team still didn't throw his way, but something happened, and I think he kind of checked out at some point.
I think losing takes a toll, and takes toll in different ways on everybody. I forgot to do this, but this Marshon Lattimore segment, it is our transaction segment, and it's proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and help support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. Guys, let's get into the compensation. Saints get a third and a fourth. They get a day 2 pick and an early day 3 pick, and they also get back their initial 6. So, Matt, how many draft picks do they own right now?
So they have 8, and they have a 7th rounder that is kind of hard to find, but the John Ridgway trade from August is helped net them that back. But they have 8. They could have up to 10 because they're probably going to get a comp pick for Yadam's departure, Isaac Yadam, who's with the 49ers now. And then they could get one apparently because of something called like net value. It's just like a supplementary pick near the end of the 7th round. So they'll probably have 3 7th rounders, 10 picks total. That's good especially if you're Mickey Loomis and you like to move up. They'll have the kind of the ammo to do it.
And currently, also, if the season ended today, they'd be picking 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Look, I think all of us are in agreement that this is really good return for a player, even of Marshon Lattimore's caliber, even if he's playing at his highest level. Look, the Rams 2 years ago for another 28-year-old corner got a 3rd-round pick and like a throw-in player for Jalen Ramsey, who had missed 2 games over the previous 3 seasons, unlike the 20-something that Marshon Lattimore's missed. He made 2 first-team All-Pros and 3 Pro Bowls. He's in the prime of his career, and he's playing some of the best football of his career. That is not what Marshon Lattimore is at right now. The Saints inarguably got a better return for Marshon Lattimore. So I guess, I don't know, were you guys surprised when you saw what it was? I mean, Matt, I know you were. You were talking about maybe a 6th in our group chat, which people probably would have been very upset about. But
yeah, it was maybe what Washington was willing to offer. I had heard kind of a 6th, but that they clearly.
Well, I think once other teams get into the negotiation, and you got teams with championship hopes, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Commanders, I guess the Chargers were also in on this. Look, that's at least 3 of those teams have legitimate Super Bowl shot this year, and another one has outperformed their preseason expectations, and maybe with Justin Herbert can quickly develop into a Super Bowl contending team. So I think that probably drove the price up, but still, it was still surprising.
Yeah, it is, and I'd like to point out another underrated part of this trade. So I'm going to hit the bell because Washington was willing to give up their 3rd rounder. I think in part because they had an extra one. Mm-hmm. They got the extra one by trading Jahan Dotson to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh man,
Dotson was the reason Washington got Dotson in the first place. Is because they moved back in the draft with New Orleans. So that Chris Olave trade in 2022 kind of helped them get rid of Marshon Lattimore and net this return today. So it's kind of all connected, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I thought the compensation was great. And I think it happened because I don't think Washington makes this move if they're not ascending right now.
No, yeah, absolutely.
They went for it, and I think that's a smart move. I mean, if you're a Washington Commanders fan, you've got to be excited. I mean, and it should give Saints fans some hope, right? I mean, you can turn this thing around quickly if you hit on the right draft, and that's
If you draft Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, no, Jaden Daniels changes a lot of things, but all of a sudden, that's what makes this league so incredible. Is 1 year you can turn it around. We've seen it happen here. We saw it in 2006, very same thing.
Yeah, that's one of those things I tweeted yesterday. I know we look at these trades and like, oh, who won? They won, and I think it's possible for both teams to win a trade. And I think that's probably the case in this one. I mean, Washington got what they needed, and the Saints, assuming they draft well, which hadn't really been the case lately, but assuming they draft well, I mean, I think this is a really chance to do some stuff.
Well, you look at their day 2 picks the last 4 years. Obviously, last year feels kind of like a wash with most of the draft. Kendra Miller's been hurt. Isaiah Foskey has been pretty much invisible as a second-round pick. But they drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry in the second round of this year's draft. He looks like a good player. He's probably going to be a cornerstone player for them now.
He better be.
He better be.
It's got to be healthy.
They drafted Alontae Taylor in the second round. They drafted Pete Werner in the second round. They drafted Paulson Adebo in the third round. All day 2 picks, probably their best picks of the last 4 years. So I think they have an opportunity to turn this into a really good player. But, obviously, like if they whiff on the third and fourth round picks or they use those to trade up into the second round or whatever and they whiff on that pick, then it's going to feel like a huge missed opportunity. But, I mean, regardless, like we were saying, Marshon's probably not part of the long-term rebuilding plans. They are absolutely heading for some sort of a rebuild. And while they're going to have to eat the huge poison pill next year with the dead cap charge, you were taking his salary off the books for 2025 and 2026, which Washington is totally able to stomach because they have a quarterback on a rookie contract.
And you could be looking at a top 5 pick, which this organization hasn't made, I think, since Reggie Bush, right? Mm-hmm. Number 2 in 2006.
2006, yep.
It's been a long time. I mean, that's part of the problem is they've always been drafted near the bottom of the first round. I think the highest they've ever gotten up was maybe around 11 or so. Was it
for Lattimore?
Yeah, somebody 9.
Lattimore in 2017.
Yeah, what was Olave? Was Olave the
11th? Olave was 11th, but they traded up for it.
Yeah, so like that's the highest I think they've ever been. So there is some excitement with that, and there's opportunity there, to get a really
unless they
impact
reel
player.
off 8 straight.
Right.
Rizzi Mobile.
It'd be interesting to see how. I know some Saints fans will be wanting them to have that top 5 pick, but I think this team's going to want to try and finish strong and kind of, destroy those hopes a little bit.
Just beat the Falcons and then lose the rest.
All right.
I think that'll make the fans.
This is actually a really good segue. Okay, our last slide here. How should the Saints approach the rest of 2024? Really good segue for that because I think there's 2 competing schools of thought here. Some people want to see this team show a little fight. They want to see at least an improved product on the field. It starts obviously this weekend with a big game against, what we thought was going to be a big game against the Atlanta Falcons, who have looked quite impressive over the last couple of weeks. Maybe you want to see Darren Rizzi look like a potential candidate for head coach. There have been interim head coaches who have gone on to get the job, but maybe some people want to see him just kind of call it a season and get one of those top 5 picks. So I kind of want to get y'all's perspective. Where do you kind of fall on this?
I say if you're Rizzi, get you 3 wins. Beat the Falcons, beat somebody in the middle, maybe beat Jaden Daniels or Jameis or either one.
That would be hilarious.
And then beat Tampa at the end. I think everybody will be like, okay, we're 5-12, and that'll get you somewhere in the top 10 probably. So
Yeah, that'll get you a very nice pick. And I do want to say that I don't think next year's draft is a very good quarterback draft. It's certainly not what last year's draft was, or this past year's, where you have 3 guys who are kind of obviously the top 3 picks in the draft, and I think 6 quarterbacks went overall in the first round. I don't think this is going to be that. I don't think there's even a clear-cut number 1 quarterback prospect in this. I think I saw Nate Tice, who I know you and I both really respect, had LSU's Garrett Nussmeier is the number 1 quarterback in this class in his last rankings.
Oh, wow.
And he was like the number 12 overall prospect in his rankings. So, I just...
I'm taking Shador or Cam Ward over.
Yeah, well, there's legitimate questions about all these guys is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is going to be like an obvious number 1 overall draft prospect. So that's a little bit... It's a little bit against the let's just go for broke and tank this thing. because I don't know if you necessarily want to be setting yourself up for that. It would not surprise me if they do end up having a terrible finish to the season and getting a high draft pick. If they then cut bait on Derek Carr, eat that big, have $100 million in dead cap charges, and just go into next season being like, hey, Spencer Rattler, see what you can do with this bad roster, and we'll punt on the quarterback in 2025 and see what 2026 looks like. But for me, I just want to see them not lay down. That's the only thing I'm really caring about, because the last couple of weeks, man, it's been absolutely brutal to watch. It's been brutal to cover. I can't even imagine being a Saints fan watching what's transpired. So that's what I want. I want to see Rizzi inject some juice into the team, and even if they continue losing, I just want to see the losing look a little bit different.
Yeah, I'd like to see some of these young guys take a step forward. Like if Bub Means can come back from injured reserve and string a couple good games together at the end. Mason Tipton, I know he's undrafted, but if he showed what he showed in training camp, even like a guy like Alontae Taylor, he's still young. If he can make that ascension to stardom or be a star level corner, which I think he's kind of maybe on track to do, I just want to see them kind of take that next step, because collectively, I just don't think they're going to get a lot of wins. I think this upcoming stretch is actually going to kind of peel back just what kind of talent this roster is missing now that Dennis Allen is gone. It's that there's still, I think, some problems with this team. So we'll see. But I do. They've got to find, before Dennis Allen was fired, he was talking on the radio about how they have some good young players. He didn't know if they had any great young players. I want to see if anyone can make that leap.
I think there's opportunity, right? I mean, there's opportunity for these young guys. I think it'll be interesting to see if the coaching staff, like Joe Woods, is now taking over the defense. Is he going to have a different philosophy as far as the rotations are concerned? And is there going to be more of a let's kind of take these 8 games as a trial basis of using some of the younger guys in more prominent roles? But then you also have to think about they owe it to the fan base. They owe it to the DeMario Davises, Cam Jordans of the world to kind of give their best efforts here. I mean, those guys are in the end of their careers, and they're going to want to play and win. So I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. I'm interested to see I think Cam Jordan played 10 snaps. 10 snaps against Carolina. And if they were getting tons of production elsewhere, but that's got to be the lowest of his career. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe some of this stuff changes going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think we all just want to see some, like you said, fight. And I think they'll come out with a lot of energy Sunday. If things go south early, though, I don't know what happens at that point. So I don't know how much juice Rizzi has in him. But
how much fight? How much fight they do have? Right. Yeah.
Well, we'll get a couple days of practice observations, see how much things have changed before we come back on Friday to do our preview show for the Saints and Falcons game. It has been fun talking about all these crazy changes over the last couple days, but we'll see if things settle into a little bit more normalcy over the next couple days. We will be back. Until then, this has been Rod Walker. I'm Luke Johnson, Matthew Paris, Jeff Duncan, Norman Bell has been producing us. We've been the Saints Insider. Thank you for watching. We'll check you all next week or on Friday.